Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths from our Farm Journal newsroom here in northern Indiana as we continue to bring the latest update on the coronavirus outbreak and the impact to agriculture. A lot of stories out there in the news today, some pretty big moving stories that we're continuing to track. Of course, we'll get to all of those, as many as we can here in the next few minutes. Thanks for joining us for today's Farm Journal Live. Let's get to the headlines. The Labor Department reporting more than 4.4 million laid-off workers applied for U.S. unemployment benefits last week. Roughly 26 million people have now filed for jobless aid in the 5 weeks since the coronavirus outbreak began. And about 1 in 6 American workers have now lost their jobs since mid-March. It is by far the worst string of layoffs on record, and economists have forecast the unemployment rate for this month could go as high as 20%. Meanwhile, the House today taking up the Senate passed $483 billion aid package. That bill would bring the unprecedented total of funds approved for this crisis to nearly $3 trillion. The legislation includes more money for small business loans and payroll protection plans. President Trump has said he'll sign it. Now, a new report just out from Feeding America finds that the number of food insecure children could escalate to 18 million because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Carrie Calvert of Feeding America, she's in government relations, agriculture, and nutrition, one of the spokesperson there. Carrie, this would be the highest total ever, according to the USDA, since it's been tracking this for the last 25 years.
That's right. We always know that child food insecurity is higher than adult food insecurity. Children face many, many unique challenges, and we know that this pandemic situation that we're seeing is not likely to change that. We're projecting that child food insecurity is going to increase from 11 million to 18 million. And I think the statistic you just shared of unemployment claims illustrates why we're going to see such a jump in child food insecurity. The amount of resources that are available to families and individuals that are hit by this pandemic and this economic crisis are just not enough to keep up with the demand that's there right now.
You know, some of the things, the numbers that we've heard are pretty staggering. The demand at some of our food banks around the country up 40, 50%. Those are big numbers. We've seen mile-long lines at some of these locations.
That's right. We've been surveying our food bank network every 2 weeks to get a quick pulse on the demand that they're seeing, the resources that they have on hand. The last time we got that data from our food banks about a week ago, 95% of our food banks reported that the demand for food assistance has skyrocketed. The average increase of demand is 70%. Now, clearly, average, some areas of the country are going to see less of an increase, some much more. But what that's telling us is, people that are impacted by the pandemic, if they're laid off from work, it takes some time to file for unemployment. If they're eligible, it takes some time to sign up and receive SNAP benefits. And oftentimes going to their food bank or their food pantry for help is the first step they can take to make sure their family has something to eat tonight.
We do know that USDA has said, came out today, said that they're going to increase SNAP benefits by 40%. But like you said, it takes time. It takes time to get all of that worked out in the pipeline.
It does take time, and also that increase, which was included in past legislation, that's really for the life of the pandemic emergency. We know the actual economic recovery will be much longer than that. That's why Feeding America and many other anti-hunger organizations are asking Congress to include a 15% increase in SNAP benefits for the length of the economic recovery in the next COVID legislation. The 2008 stimulus legislation did something similar. SNAP is a program that responds very effectively in times of heightened need, brings new people into the system generally very effectively. It's obviously hard to process so many new people. States are definitely having a hard time processing everyone that's newly available right now, but it is able to respond to increased need very well. And it also provides economic stimulus and helps ensure that there's food access. We're really worried about our retail partners and their ability to make sure that they can continue providing, safe, affordable access to food if there's a protracted economic downturn. We know that The margins in our food supply chain are pretty razor thin, whether you're a producer or a grower or a manufacturer or a retailer. And with people having less money coming into their to their household, they're going to have less to spend on expenses. And if I need to pay my rent or my power bill or purchase food at a retail establishment, normally I'm going to try to make sure I have a roof over my head or, to keep the lights on first. And that's why we've seen such an increase in demand across our network.
Carrie Calvert with Feeding America joining us here on Farm Journal Live. And Carrie, one of the things from an agricultural perspective we have been talking about is USDA's come out and said they're going to buy some of the excess product we have out there on the market. It's been about $3 billion, but of course, once they buy it, it has to get somewhere, and one of the target destinations are our food banks. How is that going? Have we heard any talk about the logistics of making that happen? What's the process right now?
Right. Well, I really have to applaud USDA for thinking outside of the box. They, in the past, a lot of times, if there's an excess on the market, USDA might make a market support purchase of food and distribute it through the food banks. I think USDA is hearing both from the growers and producers that there's a lot of perishable food that's not making it into, like, say, the food service or restaurant supply chain right now. So they're seeing fields being plowed under or milk being dumped at the same time, but they're seeing these long lines at food banks. And this is another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, that can be deployed to help. So the way I understand it is USDA is going to really bring food distributors into this process as well, to try to make sure that food banks can have these perishable boxes of produce or dairy or pre-cooked meats that are going to be delivered and can go straight into a person's trunk. USDA had a public webinar the other day, and I think 3,800 organizations and people were on it. There is widespread interest. So I don't have a lot of details about the specifics. I think they're expecting an RFP to go out either at the end of this week or early next week, so that interested, vendors can learn more. I think one of the things that we're focused on as a network is how can we make this easier for distributors or vendors that want to learn more about our food banks. We're working really quickly to try to collect and aggregate how much capacity all of our network has, so that people can understand, the food bank in this service area could take this many boxes, delivered how often over this period of time, because we know that that's going to be information that USDA will need as they're evaluating what is likely to be widespread interest in this program. So I really do think they are trying to think creatively about how this can be a part of the solution.
It sounds like it may be a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, before we start to see this move in a real significant direction. Do we have that long?
I think it takes time. This seems like it's moving at lightning speed from probably federal government contracting perspective, but I'm sure if I were a grower or a producer that was having to make the painful choice to dump the food I've been producing right now, or if I were a family waiting in line, I would think even a few weeks is too long. But I think it's going to take time to, for USDA to really evaluate all of the interest that's going to come through in this program to make sure that they're reaching every community across the country. That's really going to be a significant undertaking. So we understand they want to try to get, food moving out towards, in 4 weeks. And that is an aggressive time frame, but, we're ready to work with them to see if we can make it happen.
Well, reworking our entire food chain is a big job. Really appreciate the insights today. Thank you for joining us here for Farm Journal Live. Let's get to a few other headlines as we go through today. New export sales numbers out from USDA with some new shipments headed for unknown destinations, usually an indication of a Chinese purchase. New today, Reuters reporting that China is preparing to buy more than 30 million tons of crops for state stockpiles. That may include 10 million tons of soybeans, 20 million tons of corn, and about 1 million tons of cotton for their state reserves. Meanwhile, dozens of U.S. meat packing plants now closed temporarily as the industry works to contain the spread of COVID-19. And it's not just workers getting sick. Bloomberg reporting 100 USDA food inspectors have now confirmed to have cases of the virus. Now, this map here, which you may see has some plants that are closed right now across the country. They're the ones marked with the red X's on the map. The latest added to the list, a Tyson plant in Logansport, Indiana. Meanwhile, Kansas exporting about a fourth of the country's fresh beef, and the state has confirmed cases of the virus among workers at National Beef and Cargill plants in Dodge City and Liberal. Right now, those plants are staying open. There is talk of making plans to even quarantine some meat packers at junior colleges across the state. Matt Teagardens with the Kansas Livestock Association. He joins us now. And Matt, Kansas packers equate to roughly about a quarter of beef supplies in the country. That's vital, not only to cattlemen and women, but for consumers here.
Both sides. The packers perform an important service here to convert cattle to the great tasting, wholesome, healthy, nutritious beef that consumers love. And it's a big part of the Kansas beef industry. As you indicated, about 25% of our nation's packing capacity is here in Kansas, and they're facing significant challenges, just like other processors, beef processors, pork processors in particular, here in across the Midwest.
Now, we have heard some talk about possibly, taking those workers and putting them in a place and keeping them quarantined there. What have you heard on that front, and how serious is this being considered?
Yeah, so a number of things, trying to, number one, account for the safety, the health and safety of those plant workers. That's first and foremost, I think, in everybody's mind, whether it's the packing companies, the local health officials, and really our perspective as well. So accounting for that, and that may include providing some alternative housing for some of those individuals, whether they're going through a quarantine period if they have tested positive, but perhaps even those that aren't, that are healthy, that are not infected, having a safe place for them to go after work to hang out and keep them protected. So looking at a number of options. Again, number one, the health and safety of those workers. But then secondly, it is really vital for our country, the consumers across the country, for cattle producers, for livestock producers, that these plants remain operational, that they get back to as close to fully operational as possible.
We talk about the packers here obviously wanting to keep them open and keep them working. The flip side of that is that remains and will help keep a market open for our cattle producers, which is something I know the Kansas Livestock Association is really focused on.
Yeah, it is, and those are our members, and so that's our primary focus, is trying to troubleshoot this issue so that we can get as many cattle harvested as possible. Our cattle numbers around us are fairly high. We have a number of cattle ready for harvest, and so we need all the packing capacity online as possible. We don't have that right now. Plants are slowed down. Some have been closed. They're spacing workers apart, which is the right move from a health standpoint. That slows down the throughput. That slows down the number of animals that they can harvest in a day. And so those are the challenges, and we're working to try to mitigate some of those, help workers feel comfortable coming to work, provide for their safety, whether that's some testing, personal protective equipment, those types of things that will help create a safe work environment for those folks so that we can get these cattle harvested. The more, the longer this slowdown happens, the more those cattle will back up. We have the opportunity to spread some of those cattle out a little bit, but nevertheless, we have a number of market-ready cattle that we need to get harvested, and we need to get that product to consumers.
Matt, one of the things USDA came out with last week was some support here for livestock operators, cattle producers. Where does that stand? What's your read on whether that's going to be enough? And I know there have been some talk about the payment limits there.
Yeah, so it appears, and you mentioned earlier in the program, the $3 billion for food support programs. That would leave $16 billion for ag producers, livestock producers, crop producers. And so the piece that I think we've got confirmation on is a payment limit that would be $125,000. And that's I don't mean to indicate that's not a significant amount of money, but when you start calculating the losses and comparing that to that payment limit, it really is a decimal point of the market losses that many KLA members have experienced through this pandemic. And so we're highlighting that to USDA, to members of Congress, making that clear. And we just are looking at ways to make sure that see if we can cover more of the losses that our members have experienced.
Well, Kansas livestock cattlemen there going to survive this thing? How are we doing?
Yeah, I think we're a resilient bunch. Our members are Kansas livestock producers are a resilient bunch, and it's not the first time we've had to face adversity, and so I think our members are focused on what they can control, and that's taking great care of their livestock, whether that's cattle or dairy cows, hogs, just doing the very best job that they can on their farms and ranches.
Matt Teagarden, appreciate it, with the Kansas Livestock Association. Thanks so much for joining us on today's Farm Journal Live. Remember, as you go out and do the work today, to think of us and continue to follow along as we go and report the stories and the information that's coming in about this coronavirus. You can follow along by going to agweb.com/coronavirus. And while you're out there on the farm, make sure you show us what you're doing. You can hashtag FarmOn if you'd like to include a post. Show us how you're still out there working, getting the job done each and every day. Or you can text FarmOn to 31313 and then send the picture or video there. Thanks everybody for watching today. We'll be back with more Farm Journal Live tomorrow. Have a great one.
This season, rather than madness, opening days, or taking a break, the world is frozen, silenced by quarantines, isolated by distance, and edging on panic. But while work for you may have changed, out here, we're still going strong. Our season is underway. The crops will get planted, the livestock will be fed, and your food will continue to be grown, just like it's been for generations. There's plenty to worry about. But out here, social distancing is our specialty. American agriculture farms on, today and tomorrow, for our family and yours.